Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's listening to Don't Get a Therapist Yet. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Hannah Gilbert, and she is a qualified psychotherapist. So, Hannah, a very warm welcome to you. I'm so honored to have you as a guest.
Oh, hi, Wendy. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. So, if anybody hasn't sort of put two and two together, your surname is Gilbert. And I think there's a very famous person who's got the same surname as you, Paul Gilbert. Is there any
Yes,
connection?
yes. Bit of a coincidence. Yes, he's my father.
Wow, how amazing. And how amazing to be grown up with somebody who is so well known and has done such good things, Paul Gilbert, OBE, for mental
Mm.
health services.
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky and I'm very proud of him.
Yeah, yeah, we all are. We all are. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's great. But I think there's a lot that you've done yourself where you actually claim your own merit. I think you've been very hard. And tell us a little bit more about your role. What is it that you're doing at the moment?
Okay, so as you said, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a small private practice. But most of my time is spent working for the Compassionate Mind Foundation, which was established in 2006. We're a charity, and we kind of our role is to promote compassion focused therapy, but also compassion science and compassion ways of being. So we do a lot of training workshops for mental health professionals, but recently we've started to develop more personal practice sort of events and workshops for people. We also have an active research department, so we're kind of involved in the clinical side and the research side, but also in the kind of personal practice side.
And that is so good to know. And I've personally have been on a number of your courses, and I think they're brilliant. And I absolutely love compassion focused therapy. I'm going to call it CFT now, just as for short. It's one of my favorite therapies, and so I find it so effective. So I'm really looking forward to listening to what you say about it. But you've been working very hard. I believe you are a doctor. You have a
Yeah.
PhD. Tell us more about what you studied.
Yes. Okay. So I my path is didn't initially start in psychotherapy or psychology, although obviously growing up in that household, I was always very interested in it. Originally, I trained as an anthropologist and I studied at the University of York in the Department of Sociology, looking at spiritualist mediumship. So my study was interested in what people's experiences were of speaking to spirits and how they come into this sort of community and this kind of practice. I spent quite a lot of time interviewing people about their experiences and collecting their histories. I attended quite a few demonstrations. So I've always had an interest in how people experience the world. And I'm particularly interested in what we call extraordinary experiences, which are things that aren't kind of everyday sort of experiences. But it was really good training in talking to people, in
Mm.
talking to people about their lives and about what matters. But that was about 15 years ago now. So, yeah, I studied I lectured in various different departments for a little while, but then I kind of felt this, I suppose kind of psychotherapy and psychology has always been my home because I grew up
Mm.
surrounded by that and meeting all of my dad's colleagues and being part of those sorts of conversations. So I retrained as a therapist about 10 years ago.
Mm. That's right. You've got a master's in psychotherapy as well,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting. And I'm wondering whether did you find a link between the two? Was there something about your PhD that sort of informed your interest in psychotherapy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in people. I'm fascinated by people. And I think that's something that anthropology and the social sciences and psychology really sort of speak to. And I'm really interested in how we can have dialogue between these two different areas and how we can think about culture and social experiences as part of working in mental health as well. Um, I, I suppose a little bit. Wasn't unusual to meet people who had had some quite challenging, often quite traumatic experiences,
Mm.
um, and and of course, I mean, the sort of experiences that people were talking about often caused them quite a lot of confusion, apprehension. It wasn't uncommon for people to go through a period where they didn't want anything to do with that because they're worried about what people will think. So it was, there's a vulnerability about when you're experiencing something that you feel lots of other people aren't. So I think that was that you can see lots of different connections in, I
Mm.
guess, in different way. But it did make me very interested in people's narratives and in how people experience the world. But I think that the becoming kind of part of psychotherapy was, there's always been a part of me that wants to do something, be of service in some way, I think. And, working with people and being part of their journey is really quite extraordinary.
Mm. And I can really see the links there about being, I think it's something about being authentic and being genuinely interested in people's stories and listening to their stories and to build that rapport and to respond when people are telling them about their spiritual experiences in a way which is sort of curiosity without judgment. Those are very
Yes.
sort of key skills in psychotherapy, aren't they? So I think that it sounds like there was definitely some links there for you.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. It was interesting when I started to do my integrative training, and a big part of that was person-centered theory and
Mhm.
practice. And there were so many parallels between, actually how therapists can be with people and the kind of relationships that we kind of build together. And yeah, this whole part about non-judgment. And because my PhD was that was something that was important to me because I didn't judge people's experiences. I was just interested in them. And there's quite a big movement of people who kind of take that approach. We're not here to try and explain away, but we're just really interested in how you see the world. And I think definitely there's been some overlap with thinking about actually how we value. Yeah, that's a great point about authenticity and genuinely being interested, but also of being non-judgmental.
Mm, absolutely. And I suppose you're dealing with people's experiences. It sort of often can't be explained scientifically. It's their story, isn't it? And to actually have a PhD in actually listening to people's accounts and stories, it's a very positive thing as well, isn't it? So that that's the main thing is you're listening to their experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's thinking about it. When I used to sort of train therapists recently, and some of them would get into doing research, but I used to try and kind of kind of encourage them actually to see research as something that can really hone your skills as a therapist. And actually, I think therapists make very good researchers because we're trained actually in how to have meaningful conversations and how to be with another person and really value their experience.
Yeah, very good point, actually. Yes, you're right. You're much more likely, I think, for the person to feel able, and that's what you want really in therapy, to feel the trust and the rapport, so that they're able to feel comfortable enough to share their story, which is often very painful and distressing and traumatic. And so, yeah, that's a really good point as well, that you can make good researchers as well. I like that. I like that. So you do an awful lot for the Compassionate Mind Foundation, which is a charity, which we will talk about a bit later as well. But I understand you have your own business as well. Tell us more about what your business is, Hannah.
Oh yeah, so I've got a little business. I
Little.
set this up about 12 years ago, and this was sort of when I was coming to the end of my time working in social science as an academic, and there wasn't any job security, and I was sort of wanting to maybe move back towards working more in kind of psychology. So I set up a business called Compassionate Wellbeing, and the purpose of that business is to provide mainly personal practice events so that people can come and experience compassion and train in compassionate mind training, and also bringing people together really to kind of there was a lot of mindfulness practice, and I do some trainings for therapists on particular areas to do with compassion work, but I'm particularly keen on providing space for us to practice together and support each other. It's been a little challenging since COVID. It was all kind of going reasonably well, and then everything kind of moves online, so you have to kind of change and adapt with the times. But it's still yeah, still running.
Fantastic. Is it face to face or are there courses available online?
I'm hoping to provide face to face in the future. It's just obviously the various kind of challenges to doing that, but I do at the moment I do these evening webinars. So just 2 hours for people to kind of meet together online. I mean, online is great. It's so many opportunities, but I do like face to face, and it can be, yeah, it's quite a special experience.
I think I like the fact that there are choices now because there's
Yes.
certain things which are really good to do online, and I've done training online and I've actually really enjoyed it. There's something really nice about not having the stress of going at everything as well. But just like you, I also love that sort of real life experience where you do meet people and you have a chance to chat over a cup of tea and everything like that and share ideas and network. So I suppose we've got a richness of
Yeah.
possibilities now, which we hopefully can embrace, and people can have choices as well.
Yeah.
Because I think there's lots of people who listen to this podcast might be very interested in knowing you do these well-being practices. It sounds like a really good um, service to provide. And yeah, I mean, brilliant. So uh, if you're okay, I suggest you put the details on the show notes later on. And then if people want to access some sort of personal experience, it's really good. Because one of the reasons I set up the podcast is people can't access therapy. They can't afford it. We're over booked on the NHS. So actually knowing they can speak to an experienced practitioner like yourself and actually learn some compassion focused therapy skills, I think is absolutely amazing, Hannah.
Yeah, well, thanks. No, and I think that's another point why podcasts like yours, Wendy, are so necessary. I say, I mean, they're helpful, of course, but I think they're, we can go so far as necessary because, we are living in a time where it's difficult to access the kind of traditional kind of forms of support. Um, but there are, and I think going back to your point about choice, I think it's our responsibility to provide as many different choices as possible for people. You don't have to just go down one particular road, but there are a lot of fantastic guided practices and communities, and lots of people who are very keen to provide support however they can for people. Um, and there's a lot to be said for building community, I think, and finding community.
And it feels there's an opportunity to have tasters, like today's a
Mm,
bit of a taster,
mm.
and going on one of your webinars is another taster, isn't it? To say, do I like this approach? Don't know anything about it. Does it suit me? And then you can go further and then perhaps, go on a 1 day course or something like that as well. You can sort of build up those skills, can't you? But it's like a taster to see, what is it all about and will this suit me? Mm.
Yeah, and I'm all for those. I love a taster.
Good old taster. Okay, lovely. So, Hannah, there's so many subjects we can talk about, but probably the most important thing to talk about today is your knowledge and experience in compassion focused therapy. So, is it okay just to ask you what is compassion focused therapy and what does it mean?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, compassion focused therapy is a model of therapy. It's an integrative model. So, we're inspired and we draw on evidence, practice, all kinds of different things from lots of different areas. So, I mean, one thing I'm particularly passionate about are kind of interdisciplinary, or so we're faced here with the issue about what it is to be human and how do we address suffering, etc., etc. So there are lots of different ways that people have tried to address that question. So we integrate different kind of psychotherapeutic models and things from CBT and from person-centered and psychodynamic and all of those sorts of things, but it's also been very influenced by particularly Mahayana Buddhist practice and mindfulness practice. We also draw quite a lot on areas like neuroscience. So in CFT, we're one thing that we're quite keen on is using the body to support the mind. So being able to use practices and behaviors and lots of different things as to how we can help to, as best as we can, stimulate some physiological changes. So we know that certain kind of breathing practices can have an impact on your heart rate, and well, I mean the science is quite astounding, really. So it's kind of bringing together kind of lots of different things. It's also very influenced by evolutionary theory. So we
Yeah.
have a particular theory of mind, and I know, Wendy, that you've talked about the three-circle model. So that's quite a big part of our kind of understanding and impacts a lot of our approach. I think So one thing about CFT is also a recognition that life is hard. Yeah, I mean, it feels a bit of a no-brainer, really, but life is really is difficult. And
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's a tendency to think that if we struggle with things like anxiety or depression or self-criticism or shame, that it's because there's something wrong with us. And that's a narrative it's been around for a long, long time. But I think, in our perspectives, we kind of see that in a different way, in that, actually our brain has evolved to be sensitive to lots of different things. And it's quite well designed in some ways. So the fact that we're able to have this conversation like this, and there's all kinds of technology in my room, and I mean, that's amazing what the human brain's capable of doing. It's not so well designed in other ways. So, if know anyone who's had a panic attack, it's not, might not be very convenient. You might not like it, but you can't just tell yourself not to. Oh, it's not convenient to have a panic attack right now. I'm going to stop it. It doesn't work like that. And one of the reasons is that we've evolved to be very threat sensitive. And part of that is you're not really supposed to debate whether or not that threat is worth defending yourself on or not. It's about to be immediate. So that creates kind of quite a lot of problems for us. It's quite easy for us to get stuck in loops. The fact that we can think about thinking can create problems in and of itself. So we can imagine the worst case scenario and all of that sort of stuff. So that there's a really kind of strong emphasis on kind of de-shaming our struggles within CFT, and kind of look, we're all on this path called life, and it is challenging, and a lot of the things that you experience are not your fault. So that's kind of one of our sort of key messages is, like it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you struggle with anxiety. Like, we've got a brain that's hardwired to experience that and respond to threat in that way. But there are ways actually that we can help with that. There are things that we can do to support ourselves. So that's yeah. So there's that kind of element. So within CFT, there's also something called compassionate mind training.
Hmm.
And Chris Irons, a good
Yes.
mine who had recently, he and his colleague Charlie Herrick Maitland have done quite a lot of work on developing 8-week courses and helping to kind of translate this for the general public. But compassionate mind training is effectively how we train our mind in compassion. And there are lots of different ways that we can do that. Um, I guess another thing that's important is that we see compassion as a motivation, and that when we harness compassion as a motivation, that can help to organize our mind. So one thing that my dad will always says, for a long time, in fact, his first book came out when I was about one, and then we've got a copy of it that's got some of my scribbles.
Oh, how sweet. Oh, lovely.
It's really, yeah, it's lovely. And but so he's always very interested in about the, kind of about brain state. And so some of the compassion focused work is about actually how we can use compassion to help change our brain state. So, if you were to encounter a particular challenge, say, for example, if you were very anxious, you'd encounter that in a different way to if you were very, very angry. But if you can sort of cultivate a more compassionate way of being to yourself and to others, you might encounter that in a different way. So it's kind of, how do we switch our brains to a more compassionate way of being? It
Mm.
takes practice. But it's worth it.
Yeah, and there's so many things I love about CFT, and I think just understanding how I mean I normally start with every person I start with CFT now. Um, every just understanding how our brain works and the
Mm,
evolutionary theory, and this is how your brain is wired. It just makes sense to people. They just go, oh, oh, I get that. Especially the sort of, the red brain, the fight and flight brain. Oh, that's why I'm like that, and my brain doesn't work very well. And that somehow just gives them some sort of feeling of power and control, and it's okay. It's my brain. It's not me. It's my brain. So I totally agree with that. I think that's a really, really good thing. And then the other thing I like so much about CFT, but the other thing I think is really, really good, it's not just a talking therapy. And for years, CBT has introduced more sort of practical things, and arts therapists have done more experiential stuff. But it's got so many practices that you can engage in, which are very, very lovely to do as well. So many of them are so pleasant and nice to do. So often with people, I would do a kind of suggest a couple of practices, and make sure they're okay doing them and everything like that, and then they can go off and practice themselves. So it's incredibly empowering and positive, and creates good feelings in you as well. And I think that's very, very special to CFT, that it can be so powerful and so positive to engage with so early on in therapy, and people love it for that. So just wanted to
Absolutely. Yeah.
share my experience there.
Oh, thank you. No, that's really
Yeah.
that's wonderful feedback and lovely. It's I mean it never ceases to to really touch me actually how CFT is, and finding compassion, compassionate mind training, you know, how much it impacts people and how much of a difference that it can make. And I think yeah that it's accessible. There are lots of parts of it I think that are very accessible and also quite practical.
Mm,
I think it can be challenging. I think
mm,
a lot of us have a lot of fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion.
mm,
Again, that's not our fault.
mm,
There are all kinds of reasons as to why. But what another thing that well, I love many things about CFG, obviously, but I think the other point is that rather than seeing things like fears, blocks, and resistances as if they're a block on your journey, there's like, okay, actually, let's be curious about these things. Like,
mm,
what is the wisdom
mm,
within fears, blocks, and resistances that we can unlock? And
mm,
that's, I think people often underestimate how much wisdom they have,
mm.
in the sense that I think sometimes I think it's quite clear from how people are great at self-criticism, like
Oh.
fantastic, but not so good at recognizing actually when I am,
Mm,
what my strengths are. And I think there are various reasons for that. So, but I think there's that these are part of the journey rather than, oh, if they come up that this, like, I don't know if people have experience of doing meditation. I remember when I was
mm.
a student and I really wanted to get into meditation, and I would try and I'd sort of sit there and try and empty my head, and that doesn't work for me because my head's very busy. So it wasn't until I discovered mindfulness way of coming back. Actually,
Mm,
it's normal for your mind to wander. That's
mm,
that's that's what the mind does. It's designed to do that, but you can just keep coming back. So this idea of resetting intention, I found quite liberating. So there's lots of things like that about actually we work with what comes up for us rather
mm.
than you've got to do it this way or you've got to do it that way.
And I think the element of kindness, as you said, because mindfulness is fine and it's sort of neutral and curiosity, isn't it? It's and being, trying to engage in the present, whatever that is as well. But I do quite like the additional practices around CFT, where it is about, learning to be kinder to yourself as well, and gentle and understanding, or unintended consequences is a term that you
Yeah,
use as well. So you have a consequence, but I love the word unintended, because most of the consequences are unintended, and just having that extra word into it gives it much more sort of like, understanding approach to why things go wrong with people, rather than just a, behavior therapy, you've got it wrong. It's much more this kind of all I can use is the word kindness, trying to learn to be kinder to ourselves. I think that's a great sort of thread that CFT has, throughout the processing. So yeah, very good. I also love the saying, life is hard, life is cruel, life is difficult. I
mm,
think, that's a really important aspect that people I was just speaking to a woman the other day, and we were laughing about, we have these sort of Disney ideals about life, about how life is usually skipping along, and you just happen to meet this wonderful person, and it all goes right, and life isn't like that at all. Life is much more of struggle and hardship, and just saying that to somebody, and it's okay to have struggles, this is not your fault. Those messages are so important and so empowering for a person who's deeply suffering from anxiety or self-criticism or shame. The messages that CFT give, I think, are so empowering and so lovely for a person to hear.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Wendy. I think that's so important. You know, I mean, I think it is interesting, isn't it, to think about this idea of, yeah, skipping along and life should be like this. And there are all kinds of messages that create this sense, and it's complicated why that is, of course, but there's lots of messages that have this sense that you should have an easy, if you work hard and you do this and you do this, you should have an easy ride. Well, it doesn't work like that. And but the one thing that we are all united by is that we all suffer.
Mm.
And I mean, some of us will suffer in different ways, of course. And some of, another part about CFT is it's kind of a bit of a genetic lottery. So
Yeah,
we don't choose the bodies we're
yeah.
born into, we don't choose the parents we have, we don't choose our cult, we don't choose any of that stuff, but it will have consequences. And and some of us will be born into quite advantageous circumstances, and
Mm,
some of us won't. And there are all kinds. I loved your point as well about the thing is, I think most of us are trying to do the best that we can,
mm,
uh, um, but certain things are not always in our awareness, and we can be quite hurtful to ourselves and others without it.
mm,
Not that we don't intend to do that, but we can. So rather than kind of blaming and shaming ourselves for that, it's finding, I think, the way to come to terms with that and to make a decision that you want to. So
mm.
something that I find really powerful, because I practice compassionate mind training myself. I think that's important.
Yes.
It's about how you make the choices that you want to make.
Mm,
How do you steer your path the way that what's the sort of person that you want to be, and how do you live to that as much as you can?
mm. Yeah, very, very good. And the other thing I like about CFT, this is going to be a long conversation, but there's so many things, is sometimes in the first or second session, I'll do a CFT practice, and I'll do it with the person that I'm supporting, and they think, I feel better.
Mm-hmm.
That felt really good. I felt relaxed. I felt calm. And they're often quite shocked. I think they think they need sort of 10 sessions of psychotherapy before they feel any different and have to talk through all their problems. And the powerful impact that can actually have on people. And then they can go away and practice that on their own. I give them some guidance how to do that and make sure they're safe and they know what they're doing and everything, of course. But that is a very powerful thing. They can experience that feeling of being different in the session very early on in therapy. And CFT does that.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful point. I mean, yes, you can experience things quite quickly, and sometimes quite subtle things.
Mm,
So I'm sure you probably do this as well, Wendy. But an early exercise that we sometimes do is like is looking at different voice tones and different facial expressions. So imagining welcoming yourself in the kind of neutral or slightly hostile way, right? And saying that a couple of times, and then shift and imagine somebody that you really care about to help get those juices going, and then have a slight smile on your face and imagine welcoming yourself with a much warmer, much
mm,
friendlier. I mean, I remember the first time I did that, that was like I actually really noticed that difference.
mm,
And yeah, I mean, but the thing is that they're designed to sort of promote, and promote changes like that. But the other thing is that our imagination is very powerful, and this is part of the point. One of the big struggles with self-criticism is the degree of hostility that we relate to ourselves. And we know from research that effectively, like if we're speaking to ourselves in a really contemptuous, really condemning, really hostile way, it's kind of the same than if there's somebody externally who's kind of speaking to you like that. And we know that if you've got a boss that basically is in your face shouting at you, that's probably going to have a negative impact on your mental health. But the thing is that if you're carrying this voice inside your head, it's stimulating the same physiological responses as somebody externally.
mm. And that is so common to so many problems and conditions, isn't it? This sort of shame and self-criticism you're talking about, that inner critical voice, and how harsh they can be as well, without even realizing it. People don't even know it or realize it. And so by identifying it and noticing it, and then the power to think you can change this, you can work on this, again, it's incredibly freeing. And you can do a practice around that. Again, you don't have to do, 20 hours of psychotherapy analysis to actually start to work on that voice. You can work on that voice and understand it in a relatively short time and notice a difference.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's particularly good, isn't it, for shame and self-criticism? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Chris kind of talked about this, didn't he? That really, I mean, CFT, this was one of its kind of nurseries, for a better expression, but one of the key um, places that it came out of is a recognition of just how much people struggle with self-criticism and they struggle with shame. Interestingly, in the Compassionate Mind, which is one of Dad's first books on compassion, was he notes that when the Dalai Lama visited the West, he was quite shocked by just how many people hate themselves and are critical of themselves. He found it quite extraordinary that people would relate to themselves like that. But I don't know anybody who doesn't have some struggle with self-criticism. And I think that the point is that criticism in and of itself, I mean, just noticing, if, so for example, if I give a lecture afterwards, I'm like, okay, maybe I spoke too fast there, or maybe I didn't explain that very well. So noticing areas for improvement, okay. But the problem is when it gets into starting to be like you're a failure, you're useless, you mess this up, da, 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 it takes on a very different level of relatedness, shall we say. And often what you find with criticism is it's not doesn't tend to be a sort of like an AI chatbot voice that's just noticing where you've made a mistake. It's and sometimes it can be really quite vicious, and
Mm.
that does a lot of harm.
Mm. Absolutely. And I think the other problem is even before you do, say, a presentation, the critical voice is telling you how bad you're going to do it even before you go there. So you start off on the wrong foot thinking, oh, I'm going to do a bad one anyway, which makes you more anxious. Therefore, you're more likely to make mistakes because you're too anxious. So it
Absolutely.
becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? So yeah, so many people that I work with, the thought of doing something, they're making those negative predictions that the critical voice is there, right there in front of them before they even do it. So that's absolutely so true. So if somebody does have problems with being self-critical or intense feelings of shame, then there's lots of evidence, I understand, that CFT is really good to help people in that area.
Yes, no, absolutely. There's lots. We have quite a solid research base now, and also increasingly getting more of a cross-cultural research base, which is
Mm.
really encouraging because so one thing that we have at the foundation is we have some affiliate centers. So we have communities of people in different countries that we're connected with. So it's sort of that's very exciting to see how it works within the international. Increasingly, we are an international community. Um, in terms of I'm so sorry, Wendy, could you repeat the question? I've lost
No,
my
that's
thought.
absolutely fine. I'm just going to do a clap. Yep, don't worry about it. Doing brilliantly. It's
You could edit that bit out.
fantastic. I'm
Just
so enthusiastic. Okay,
oh no, it's lovely. Thank you.
great. Yeah, my memory's not so good. The question, what was the question? Oh, evidence for sh shame and
Yes,
self-criticism. So I'm going to do a clap and then I'll just ask the question again. Are you okay? Yeah, yeah,
thanks so
so
much.
good.
Oh, thank you.
It's
That's
so,
how
I love it so much. I don't want anybody else to hear it. I just listen to it myself all the time. Okay, then, yeah. So Hannah, I understand that CFT is really good for shame and self-criticism, as we were just talking, and I understand there's quite a lot of evidence, research to support this.
yes, we have quite a big evidence base now. There've been a lot of studies looking at CFT, looking at how it impacts on how people are critical to themselves or shame. So yeah, that's one of it. It's a very exciting part of CFT that it can really help with self-criticism. One of the things that we know is that therapy can be quite difficult if you're very self-critical.
Mm.
There is some research that suggests that people who come to therapy who are very kind of self-critical it can create kind of challenges. But self-criticism is something that we kind of work. We work with a lot of kind of focus can be on working with self-critic, and it can. I mean, I'm particularly interested in this, I guess, because struggled with my own critic, which I've been curious about because I didn't grow up in a critical household. My parents, were pretty were pretty good. It was a very kind of loving household. So I've been kind of curious about, when I got into kind of later adolescence and then when I became an adult and moved away and things that I've really struggled with self-criticism, been kind of curious about that. And I think one of the things that sort of helps is kind of thinking about where it comes from, and in part really that kind of what it's sort of communicating. So I think in many cases self-criticism is sort of communicating a disappointment, and it's communicating sometimes it communicates a real rage that we feel that we don't measure up to the compared to other people. So one thing I've had lots of discussions with people about this is because a lot of people, so weight, for example, a lot of people are very critical about their body appearance and about their weight. But when you sort of suggest, look, imagine if you grew up in a culture where actually weight just wasn't an issue, where all body types are considered to be equally attractive. Actually, the value was placed on the sort of person that you were, like your personal individual qualities. That was kind of what was judged. Do you think you would be critical about your weight? And people generally go, no. So there's something about our society, and I'm very interested in kind of cultural influences on self-criticism. But this, we learn these things, and I think increase. I mean, for women, but also for men, there's a lot of pressure on, and social media has created a whole load more pressure on, being who you feel that you should be, because we're very sensitive to other people's minds. We
Yeah.
we really want to be desirable and to be wanted. We want to be part of it. But I think when you recognize that self-criticism can be connected to this, the question in CFT is often what sits underneath criticism. Like what is how do we get to what's under there? And often that's anger and sadness and grief, and that things didn't go the way I wanted, or that I don't look the way I want, or I'm not the way I want. And it's, how do we get to that pain underneath and heal that pain? And I mean, I've done it myself, and I've found it quite transformative, in able to kind of, recognize what self-criticism is, and learning how to switch. So we do quite a lot on how do you switch to a more compassionate self? How do you switch to a part of you that wants the best for you? It doesn't want you to be lazy or any of these things that we worry about, but how do you switch to that part that actually has your best interests and wants to help you, but knows that life is difficult and knows all that and can hold all of that pain, but actually will help you to move forward.
Yeah, so good, so good. And I think that, another element I think of compassion that I often talk about with people is it's a strength, it's a sign of
Yeah.
strength, it's sort of standing up to your best self, as you said, as well, and to make sure that especially, gender stereotypes think that compassion can be perceived as a weakness, which is again culturally determined. I always make sure that people understand that it's about courage and bravery and strength and facing things as well. And so you can have a inner encourager and inner mentor, which is warm and encouraging. Some people think you need the critic to actually go forward and drive yourself, but the research doesn't say that's the case. You can have a very strong internal encouraging mentor, which can make you aspire better, I think, than an inner critic.
Yeah. I, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to address this, because compassion is a word that's in our everyday language and people mean different things, but people also have different understandings about what that means and they judge it. So, and I have seen this creeping in to social media, this idea that, of, well, we've heard people talking about things like toxic empathy, and that empathy makes you open for manipulation and all this sort of stuff. I mean, the evidence just doesn't suggest that. Empathy's actually been a quality that we've been, lots of people have been endorsing since right back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. But the thing about no compassion, it isn't a weakness. It isn't about wanting to kind of turn away from suffering. Compassion precisely is about turning towards suffering. So the definition is it's sensitivity to distress in ourselves and
Mm,
others, with a commitment to try to do our best to alleviate, prevent it. And I mean, you'll know, Wendy, and I'm sure that your listeners will know as well, to go towards your suffering is pretty courageous,
mm,
right? And I mean, some of us carry really terrible wounds, and to sort of say, do you know what, I want to go into that, and I want to try and work with it and see if I can find a way to not be in so much pain. I mean, that takes so much courage.
mm,
And understandably, a lot of us will do anything that we can to avoid going there. I mean,
mm,
again, that's completely understandable. But, and I mean, if you think about, people that fight for human rights, or people that fight for justice, and people who are prepared to stand up against people that they really believe are harmful. I mean, that takes courage. I mean, kindness absolutely can be a part of it. I'm very much in favor of kindness. Kindness is important, but compassion is also about courage. It isn't about
mm,
weakness and letting yourself be. I think there's a point to be made here about, people will say, oh, compassion's only just going to be taken for a ride. I think that really insults our sense of being able to make decisions. And also, caring is not a weakness. It's at the heart of our species. That's how we've developed the way that we have, our
mm,
ability to care for each other.
mm. Uh, Absolutely, I agree so much with everything you said, and and I think it's quite brave to come to therapy as well, because you are there
Mm,
working on your difficulties and issues, and being willing to be open and to trust another person. I think is again very brave thing.
absolutely.
And another thing I really like about compassion, which I think really helps, is I often see parents, and they're often, as we all do, struggle with, being a parent. And it's actually quite interesting and learning some practices around CFT, some techniques. They often change the dynamic of their relationship with their children as well, because what they're doing really is doing more kind of self-soothing, kind of in the green zone more rather than in the red zone, where they're getting stressed and irritated, and the tone of voice is coming up, which is sort of creating that in their children. So I think it's so learning some compassionate skills, like you say, going on that compassion training, just a few basic tools can make such an impact and difference on not only yourself, but your best relationships as well. We're not perfect. We still get annoyed with people and can get grumpy and irritable. But the idea of actually, staying in that kind of strong, green, compassionate stance can work wonders in relationships as well. I'm just sorry, your thoughts on that? Gone off on a
No,
tangent,
no,
Hannah,
that's
but
I mean, no, that's a wonderful point, Wendy. And I mean, we we also have the flows of compassion. So there are three flows of compassion. There's compassion to others, compassion from others, and compassion to self. And all of these flows are important.
yeah,
No, absolutely. And I think your example with parenting is that parenting is hard, right? I mean, I don't have kids myself, but I have the most fantastic nephew, and I spend quite a lot of time with him, and I love him dearly. Sometimes he's challenging, you
yeah,
know. It's not personal. It's because he's developing and he's exploring and trying to find his own way, and that's okay. But I think sometimes what people can really struggle with is that they feel that they behaved or made decisions that they wouldn't choose, because when you get very stressed and you really get in a threat kind of, you get very, very angry, and it's like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But the I think the point about it is that beating yourself up about that probably it won't help you. But parenting is hard. There's quite a sort of interesting body of work that sort of suggests that it takes a village to raise a child, and we're
yes,
living in much more insular, kind of the
so
idea of
true.
the nuclear family is quite unusual cross-culturally and historically. So actually, because it used to be, when you could share caregiving. And I mean, remember, we used to live in more kind of family units where there would be grandparents and there would be aunts and uncles. And so, but now, and for some of us, like it's just us. And that is hard. So, you know, I think to being fair about that, that's a challenge, right? It's nothing wrong with you. That is a challenging circumstance. But how do we use the tools that are available to us to make the choices that we would make? And yeah, being able to regulate ourselves will help with as much as we can. And as you say, none of us are perfect. It's not that idea. But how do we do that and help within our relation so that we're cultivating the relationships that we would like to have?
And I think just taking the model. And so, you are angry and irritated, you lost your temper and you said things you haven't wanted to, knowing that, okay, what can I do now differently? I can go into my compassionate, self-soothing self and then offer compassion to my child as well. So, actually repairing it and making up and it's very empowering if you think of the model in that way. Okay, I have made a mistake and I'm not proud of what I was said to my child, out of anger or irritability, but I can actually do something about it, and I can, apologize and soothe that child and explain and say all those things. So again, that I think in itself is very empowering. Even if you make a mistake, there's still things you can do using the
Yeah.
CFT model to actually repair and to repair the damage. And most children are just incredibly forgiving anyway and just love their parents, don't they? So they're fine about it, really. But
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So
Yeah. Sorry, I think repair, that's the word, Wendy. I mean, it's the ability to repair. And I think that's something that therapists are quite well trained in, is, we'll talk about rupture and repair.
yeah,
But this, okay, if we can just take it for granted that we're not going to have smooth sailing where everybody's always great, there's never going to be any conflict. But the courage comes from actually, like, I'm going to take responsibility and repair this.
mm, yeah, very good, very good. I just got a question about depression and anxiety. Hannah, there's people here who probably have got either depression or anxiety, and can you perhaps give some examples of how CFT would work with those kind of problems? I know they're just sort of labels, but most people come with those labels, and that's what it's called. They're what they're suffering from. Any kind of particular practical things you would do from a CFT perspective?
Oh, that's a great question. It's complicated, I think, because everybody's story is sort of different. I mean, certainly, with anxiety, I think that the understanding how the threat system work is crucial. Well,
Hmm.
crucial. It's very, very helpful to understand. So we know why we get, in a way, like, why do I get anxious? I mean, I think the challenging thing is that we are kind of sensitive to anxiety. It can potentially be very useful. The problem for many of us is it's a little bit too present, and it can kind of really sort of take over it can stop you from doing things that you want to do. And in some ways, I think that's kind of quite important. I do an example sometimes of saying, if we could, like, put your anxiety on hold for a day, right? We could press some button, etc., etc., and you didn't feel anxiety, and there was a party. It was a party with people that and that would you want to go or not? And some people will say, yes, I would. If I knew I wasn't going to get anxious, I would like to go. Okay, right. Now we know what the motive, now we know, right. So how are we going to help to build skills to be able to tolerate the anxiety and to stop it from stopping you do what you want? But some people say, actually, now I'd much rather stay at home with a book. So, but then I mean, and I can relate to that, actually. It's
Yeah, yeah.
older and it's cold. But that's kind of a different thing then. So,
Yeah.
because in some ways it's thinking, okay, so in a way, what's kind of at the root of, or what might be, it's always might be, I think, rather than being definitive, what
Mm.
might be at the root. So is it a kind of a social anxiety, but actually I really wish I could go to that party, I just get so anxious about it. So okay, so how might we work? How might we support you with that? But on the other hand, maybe it's also a case of actually I'm anxious because I don't want to do it. I don't want to go. I feel I'm being forced to do these things. And so maybe actually there's anger as part of the anxiety, as a resistance to actually I don't want to live that. So maybe then the answer is to, okay, so right, how do we work to support you to live a life that you do want? Because I mean, parties are parties. They're great, sometimes not, there's no right or wrong answer. So it's,
Mm,
finding ways to live to our pattern. I think kind of that sense of what are these things communicating to us?
mm,
And how do we, I mean, depression is again, it's complicated. Some people think it's just not feeling anything at all, or it's
mm,
just feeling sad all the time. And I mean, anybody who's experienced the depression will tell you that not even
mm,
that is not even skating the surface. It's not as clear cut as that. But there are lots of different reasons as to why we might be struggling with depression. I mean, there are sort of exercises that and kind of
mm,
practices that you can kind of try to just to help to stimulate things. But I mean, sometimes this can be challenging because it can be challenging, especially when you're very low
mm,
to do things.
mm,
But there are lots of other kind of scientific insights that we can draw on. So we're learning more, for example, about the gut and about diet and how diet can have an impact on our mood, and about kind of exercise, and there's lots of kind of different practical things. But I always think it's important to be compassionate to resistance to that, right? I completely understand. It must be very frustrating if people keep telling you to go for a run,
mm.
and that's the last thing you want to do. So,
Yeah.
but another part is that sometimes we want to do things, but we just can't find the motivation to do that. So sometimes it's, how can compassion sort of help like that? But it's kind of different, I think, for
Mm.
different for everyone.
I think you made several good points there, Hannah. But I think the one I wanted to pick up on is it's almost like having a relationship with your anxiety or depression, almost seeing it as a game with sort of curiosity, and what sort of form does it provide a function in some way, rather than just sort of, oh, it's terrible, let's cure it type of thing, very much the medical model type of idea. It's sort of, oh, that's interesting, and maybe there is a reason why it sort of turns up and shows up. And if I can actually approach it with interest and curiosity and understand it a little bit better, that gives me a different, often choices. It opens up more choices, doesn't it? Um, that's a very interesting way of actually looking at whatever it is we present with as well. Um, I really like that. I really do. And I think you're so right. I remember reading some criticism was that they went to a therapist and with depression, and all the therapist says was go for a walk. Is that all you've got? Go for a walk, And of course, we know the evidence is that it's really good to go for a walk for all kinds of, especially a compassionate or mindfulness walk, isn't it? But I suppose it's getting people to understand how they can do that when they're actually feeling so terrible and so down and so demotivated and so low with no energy, to get them to try to go for a walk is in itself is a challenge, isn't it? It's not just giving glib answers. It's much more about, like you say, really understanding, I think, all of you, isn't it? Understanding how your brain works, how your emotional regulation works, but also understanding how your diet will affect your mood and everything like that. So it's actually very empowering and getting people to really understand their brain and their body, and then how they can make choices based on the knowledge that they've got.
Yeah, again, I'm nodding in agreement. But I think actually that's such an important point. If you're, if you're talking to someone about depression, and their response is to, oh, just go for a walk. I think that also represents. I mean, probably this is not intentional. I think people want we try our best, and we want to help people, and I think sometimes this push, like I want to give you something practical. I want to do because when we when you're depressed, I mean, most people don't want to be depressed. So the how like what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? But it's really important that to be empathic,
Mm.
because I think in a lot of cases, and I've heard this from so many people, and it's similar actually, because I get a lot of headaches, and the number of times people very well intentionally will say, "Oh, have you tried this? Have you tried this?" And thinking, "Yeah,
Everything,
I've looked into this.
everything.
I've
I'm a
heard this."
researcher. I've got a PhD. I research.
Yeah, exactly. But I've heard this from lots of people who struggle with depression as well. Is the case that, do you really think I haven't thought about that?
Mm.
If it was that easy, I would have done it. So it's not, okay, so it's not about that. And I think it's me, actually validating that, yes, that's how you feel. And it's, yeah, if it was as simple as that, of course. So this it's complicated,
Mm.
and you're worthy of being met with a respect for that complication.
Mm. It's a really good way of saying. I know. I think your father, Paul Gilbert,
Mm.
like you mentioned before, we have tricky brains,
Yeah,
and parts of our brain often contradict each other as well. So I talk a lot about that with people I support. They one part of their brain says one thing, another part of their brain says other things. Often this sort of communication, this sort of dialogue between them, like you say, and just saying that as well is, I think, again, understanding compassion. Yes, we are complicated human beings, and it's not that easy to understand these simple steps. I mean, I do quite like simple steps just to help people to move forward in some
yeah,
way. But I love the way you've explained, that we are all individuals. If it was that simple, people would have solved it themselves. And to respect the person by acknowledging that, and acknowledging that they've tried a lot and tried very hard, and everything. Yeah, that's all really good points. And it validates the person, isn't it? That it
yeah.
validates their sort of interests as well. Yeah,
And
very
of
good.
course that we can be depressed for lots of different sorts of reasons. And the
Definitely.
thing is that there are a lot, I mean, what can be challenging in some cases, actually, depression can be a result of something biological. That doesn't diminish it in any way. So, but if you address a particular cause or something that might have an impact on your mood, but there are all kinds of reasons. And
Mm,
there's I mean, especially at the moment, this is kind of quite a frightening time, I think, for a lot of
mm,
people. And I mean, thinking about, not that long ago, we've just had the 5-year anniversary of the COVID lockdown, and would you be surprised if people said, "I'm struggling with anxiety, I'm struggling with depression" during that
mm,
period? Probably not, because but I think that was a time when we were all in, well, most of us anyway, were in this kind of strange time where we could actually understand that. I heard a lot of people, a lot of friends of mine have told me that, I didn't consider that I'd struggle with these things before, but I really did.
mm,
It's really sort of had a profound impact. So I think maybe that helped aided us in a kind of empathy, a
mm.
deeper empathy, perhaps. I don't know, but there's all kinds of different reasons, and it's kind of finding our own. But I guess what I would say is, don't criticize yourself if going for a walk doesn't help you. Because it's not. It means that sometimes it can do, and maybe try again, but there are other things.
Yeah. And this might be obviously I'm a trained CBT therapist, but if you can't go for a walk, a minute outside in the garden is great. Um, it can be sometimes, like you say, just being kind to yourself and saying that's okay. If I can make a very small change, and that can be very, very big for a person, and not to compare. That's another CFT thing.
Yeah, don't
Um,
don't compare.
comparing there's a saying, is it the death of happiness or something? I can't remember what the saying is, but there is a saying around that, just sort of work for your own individual good. That's really good. Yeah. So that's good to know that people with those kind of problems can definitely benefit from CFT. And another group of people that I'm finding very useful is young people. Going back to the COVID, I think what happens, a lot of people, young people, sort of miss their developmental milestones because they were taken out of school, they weren't socializing as much, and a year out of a young person's life is quite significant, isn't it? So I'm seeing more and more young people, and again, I find compassion focused therapy works really well with them as well. They really get it. They've done a little bit of biology, understand a bit about the brain and everything like that, and again, it's remarkably helpful to young people as well. They love it. Um, and they really
Yeah,
get,
no,
yeah,
sorry.
go on.
No, that's it's really encouraging. Sorry, oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries.
Um,
Hang
yes,
on. Hang on. Let me just clap back.
you
Just
take
clap
that
that little
bit
bit
out.
out.
Sorry, I was like,
No, it's all right.
oh,
Honestly, you're absolutely brilliant. I mean, I sometimes forget what I'm saying, so it's absolutely fine. If we could just do a bit on trauma and then we'll wind up. Is that okay? Yeah, just finish what you're
perfect.
saying. Okay. Okay. All right. Are you okay to go? I'll just clap and you just answer. Brilliant.
Um, yes, no, I mean it's some wonderful work with young people, but I think another, I think actually that touches on an important issue, which is yes, you did miss something important, and there may very well be some grief around that. That's valid, right?
Mm,
That's not you being weak. And I think some of the narratives of the way that we speak about young people at the moment is disappointing.
mm,
There are challenges, right? This
mm,
isn't you being weak or anything. That yes. So where can there be space for you to sort of grieve that? Yeah, because I mean, it's a really powerful example because I don't know any young people who chose the COVID lockdown. I mean, I'm not, getting into any discussion about, whether we should or shouldn't. That's beside the point. But this was another situation that you chose
mm,
to happen to you. But life is fragile and
mm,
these things can happen. So it's, yeah, whatever you're feeling is valid.
mm,
So, but what will help you with
mm,
that, right? But I think a first step is to, yeah, that's valid. That was significant. I think trying to pretend that it wasn't a big deal, blah blah blah. No, well, if it's a big deal to
mm,
you, it was a big deal.
mm,
Um, and I think we're becoming more aware of the struggles that young people are facing. It is challenging, but so absolutely cultivating a compassionate self is going to help you with that.
mm.
It's going to support you with that. I think is helpful. It's sad, really, that I mean I don't know if it's changed massively since our days, Wendy, but we don't get an awful lot of training about my emotional life, my
Nothing.
psychological life, space to explore it. Everything was taught in a very perfunctory way. Sex education was very perfunctory, but not about the kind of intense world that you go into when you. I mean, I found teenage years quite a whirlwind, but you don't have a space um, to do that where you can kind of, yeah, be confused
Mm,
and but honest. And I
mm,
think I think CFT does really value honesty.
mm. But I think Daniel Siegel is somebody who works quite a lot of
Mm.
adolescents and done some great work, but he talks a lot about the brain as well. And I think your father was one of the early pioneers to sort of bring in the neuroscience into therapy. And I think that's again one key really good thing that CFT brings a difference. I know it's more in now, but in the days when you first started it, actually knowing you've got a brain and how it works and your
Yeah,
different sort of levels of emotions, again, is so empowering to young people because they immediately understand and feel more in control then. So, yeah, that's just something that I've noticed with young people that they understand better their responses and why they respond in certain ways. It's
yeah.
amazing. So yeah, pioneering work. And just one last subject I just want to bring up because I think a lot of people might want to know is there sort of a way of CFT helping people who may have experienced some sort of level of trauma? Is there anything there, Hannah, you can add?
Yes, there is. I have a fantastic colleague called Dr. Deborah Lee, who's a real pioneer in this area. I mean, bearing in mind that, yeah, I mean, a lot of, CFT is, I mean, a lot of, I think, psychotherapy addresses trauma.
Mm,
I think a lot of us carry trauma to some degree. But Deborah's give a plug for her book because it's very good. She's written a brilliant book called The Compassionate Mind, approach to working with trauma. I might be slightly misphrasing it there. Sorry, Deborah, but it is that's it's a
good book.
fantastic. Yeah, it's brilliant. Um, so there's quite a lot of work being done on because trauma. I mean, again, trauma very complicated, affects us in lots of different ways. But in many ways, it's quite helpful to think about how trauma affects our threat sensitivity. And another thing is that for many of us, we're just not able to access the soothing system. It's not our fault, but we when we live in very heightened threat all the time, that we we don't necessarily know how to do that, but it's very important that we do, because that's what helps to regulate it. We're never
Mm.
going to get rid of the threat system. I'm sorry, anybody who tells you they can, I'm sorry, I would challenge that. So we do have to live with it, and actually a bit of threat's quite helpful.
Hmm.
Again, thinking of my nephew, there are times when crossing the road when he was little, I wished he had a bit more. Bless him.
Bit more threat.
Um, yeah, but he's working out now. But the point about it is that how, and a lot of CFT work is how do we cultivate
Mm.
our ability to be kind of how do we develop the soothing system more when it's been
Mm.
shut off, and that's and how do it helps us with our relationships. And
Mm.
but there's quite a lot of work on how we can bring compassion to working with trauma, but I'd really recommend
Mm.
having a look at Deborah's work because it's fabulous.
It is fabulous, and she's an excellent, excellent practitioner. I have lots of CFT books, and that's one of them I have. Um, and I think the way CFT has grown, like you say, in research, the amount of training there is out there, and it sounds as though, there's some steps where it's really accessible to some self-help resources. So, Hannah, could you tell us just a little bit more about the Compassionate Mind Foundation, but also your business? If people actually want to find out more, develop more skills, could you just sort of point them in the right direction?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. So I think the best resource at the moment is the Compassionate Mind Foundation. So my business is a little needs a little bit more work, shall we say. So there are some things, some personal practice things you can access on there, but generally speaking, the Compassionate Mind Foundation has got a lot of resources. And we're building and building these all the time. It's part of my job. So I'm always happy for any suggestions. So probably one of the most useful parts of the website. So if you go onto compassionatemind.co.uk and click on the tab that says resources, there's a list of lots of different things. So there's books, there's a list of lots of different books and videos if you like watching YouTube and things. But what a lot of people like are, excuse me, the audios and the guided practices. So we do have like a series. They're completely free, absolutely. No, there's no charge. So you can listen to those guided practices yourselves. There's lots of different ones. We are kind of building more and more all the time. Um, you can sign up for our mailing list. We try not to send too many emails. And if you kind of say that you're interested in personal practice, we'll try and tailor the material to that. So we're sort of developing more and more resources for people to support them in their daily lives, but also opportunities for people to come together. So we try and run some personal practice evenings, just kind of 2 hours for people to come together and practice together. But there are quite a lot of resources on the Compassionate Mind Foundation website.
Okay, that sounds really great, and I strongly encourage people to go there and use it as well. And if you really do like the practices, to maybe to consider going to an experiential one and being with people and experiencing that sort of that lovely connective connecting with people who've got a similar interest and mindset as well.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I noticed when I went to the training that everybody was so compassionate themselves. It was great to see. It was such a lovely experience as well. Yeah,
It's really nice to work in this kind of
yeah,
environment.
it is. Yeah,
I
yeah.
should say as well, sorry, that we also I've actually just come off 3 days of retreat, which was called A Mind for Compassion. So we're starting
Mm.
to try and offer more of these where you can come and spend 3 days. My dad runs it with his colleague Choden, who's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And they take you through different compassion trainings. So if you're interested in doing something really like
Mm.
in depth, and again, really just gorgeous people, and it's a
Mm.
really nice, kind of all just sharing the journey and the challenges together. Then yeah, we're running kind of more of those sorts of things, and you'd be very, very welcome.
And do you know, that sounds really great. If you can actually take just 3 days off to go to something like that and to go something sort of, run by massively experienced professionals as well, who will, who will look after you and keep you safe and everything like that. And just to try these practices, I think that's such a great, powerful thing to do. And I highly recommend that. It sounds absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure I'll be going on. Well, I'll be having
Oh,
a look myself.
it would be lovely.
Hannah, you've been an absolute delight, and thank you so much for spending time talking more about this amazing therapy and all your hard work and experience in developing it, especially the research end, because I think that is important that we do apply rigorous research to these practices. They're not sort of, as I say, they're not woo-woo. They
Hmm.
have, they're
Yeah.
grounded in scientific research, and that's
Yes,
really,
yeah.
really important as well. Okay, so thank you so much. If anybody wants to know more about those websites and how to get them, those will be in the show notes, so you can just copy them as well, and I'll also put them on my website. So, just thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.